So it's that time of year again, and this round I actually want to take a look at just two movies, so it's not going to be as big an installment as last year's was. So I did want to take a quick look at Melancholia. Once again, just a film that I saw during a sort of rough patch, and I wasn't feeling too well. I was feeling kind of cruddy, and I pretty much felt the same way the lead character in the film feels, Justine. But we'll get back to that in a few moments. So, Melancholia is the 2011 release. It is directed by Lars von Trier, and it's basically just sort of inspired by a depressive episode that he went through. I guess just sort of his way of trying to rationalize or explain why people remain calm in stressful situations. So basically the film opens up already telling you how it ends. It's basically the end of the world. Earth collides with the planet Melancholia, and that's pretty much the end of the line. So we open up with Justine. It's her wedding party, and the film's actually broken up into two parts. Obviously part one is called Justine. She isn't feeling too well, obviously, and a variety of other situations keep happening that don't really help the situation, such as her mother insulting her, or her sister coming down on her for being depressed rather than being happy. You can't force someone to be happy. I mean, if you understand how depression works, not happening. So anyway, we get to the end of the evening, and by this point, I suppose her husband's already had enough, and he basically leaves her. So part two opens up with Claire, and at this point Justine's gone. She's moved in with her sister Claire and her husband, and she's just kind of staying there for a moment. She eventually does get a little bit better, but by this point we also discover that yes, the planets are going to collide, and Claire's husband commits suicide. Claire obviously hides this fact from her sister and her young son, and we do come up on just sort of a final impact moment, literally. And Justine's obviously very calm. She's sort of created this little pretend fortress or twig teepee that supposedly, they can't be harmed. Obviously it's for the benefit of the child, but she's obviously very calm. We see Claire basically just panicking at the end, but what can you do? So originally we were supposed to have Penelope Cruz star in the film. She had just sort of been discussing possible ideas with the director, maybe an adaptation or something based off of the play The Maids. Obviously the story morphed, and Melancholia occurred instead. And Penelope Cruz was going to play the lead role of Justine, but some sort of conflict with one of her other projects that she had going on at the time prevented that. So Kristen Dunst was cast in the role instead. I think it's, obviously a very depressing film. It's kind of hard to just completely sit there, especially because it does become dull in moments, but the visuals are just amazing, very beautiful to look at. I think it's a pretty good movie. I don't really have anything against it. It's just a little too slow. So moving on. The second film I wanted to take a quick look at is Dream House, by the 2011 release. And it does star Rachel Weisz, Daniel Craig, and Naomi Watts. So we do have Daniel Craig and Rachel Weisz moving into their new home. Obviously their names or character names are Will and Libby. And it isn't long before they do discover that the previous occupants have been murdered. Eventually Will begins to suspect that the man who had murdered his family has returned. He's stalking his family now, a man named Peter Ward. So he basically does track this record back to the asylum that Ward had been held at, and he discovers that he actually is Peter Ward. He had basically created somewhat of a alternate reality or a second personality to sort of shield himself from what had happened. Obviously he couldn't believe that he would have murdered his family. It is eventually revealed by way of neighbor Anne, who is played by Naomi Watts, that the whole thing was basically a fluke. Apparently Anne's husband had hired some guy to murder her, sort of as a payback for divorcing him, which is very childish and petty if you think about it. But obviously the moron goes into the wrong home, murders the wrong family, the real Peter Ward obviously winds up paying for this. Somehow he does return. During the whole tussle, the house is set on fire. Peter runs back into the home, sort of try to ask for forgiveness from his family. Obviously he still sees them, and they obviously, how old no ill will, they urge him to leave the house and save himself. But you know, it was just such a sad moment in the film, because you realize that's the end of the fantasy. He has to return to reality, and he has nothing. I mean, this beautiful home that he thought he still had is just nothing but a decrepit shack, although now it's on fire, so it won't be a shack much longer. So it's just very disheartening, just the fact that he basically ends the film, he has nothing, and he eventually does make the choice to walk out and save himself. But it just kind of makes me wonder, I mean, why had he not chosen to stay? He basically had nothing left. I mean, he obviously created this fantasy to protect himself, and obviously that was ripped away, and he had to, obviously he made the right decision, chose to go on and keep living. But I was just sort of curious why he didn't just stay. I mean, I honestly thought that's what the character would have done, is he would have just stayed in the house, and that would have been the end of the film. Honestly, that would have been the preferable ending that I would have gone with for the film. But obviously, most people prefer happy endings. But that is pretty much all I have for you today, and I will talk to you later.